My position here today is a bit strange because I've been listening this afternoon, to sales pitches. And mine's not really a sales pitch. I'm from the Henley Business School. And actually, I thought I'd just do a bit of a teaching lesson today on strategy. So my title, Disruption, the New Norm, surrounds the topic of teaching. And interesting, I was just talking with one of my colleagues about, what the difference between teaching and education is versus training. And training is a repetitive, something that you could probably automate. Teaching is what hopefully uses the brain. So this is what we're going to talk about. I run the strategy program at the Henley Business School. It's a comprehensive program for executives. I also do open courses and a variety of bespoke courses. But we at Henley felt that it would be a lot better if we were able to at least leave you today with something that you've learned as opposed to just another sales pitch. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So, what do we got? This is my background. I've worked all over the world. I've worked with many, many companies. I'm what's called a practitioner. That's a derogatory title that academics give us. But these days, I'm kind of in between because I'm actually, at my ripe old age, working on a PhD as well. And if you know what PhD stands for, it's piled higher and deeper. But my particular area of interest is this whole concept of disruption. So what we're going to cover is these 4 points today. The fact that disruption is not new. Now that's interesting because I'm sure what you've seen here as you've walked around all the exhibitions, etc., is a lot of new things. Perhaps there's a lot of solutions looking for problems out there. So hopefully I'm just going to address this issue about what is disruption. Not to beat it down, but to show that actually it's part of business. It's just part of business. So that leads us to the second issue about how the way we're looking at strategy needs to change. And that disruption is broader than technology. From a managerial standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a strategy standpoint. Lastly, then, so how is it that you lead in uncertain times? What is it that you need to do to make an agile organization and use insight to actually become more competitive? So if you think of all those stands that you've seen out there, what really differentiates anybody? Are they actually giving you anything different that's adding value to your business? So, disruption's not new.
Of the Pony Express begin their race to cut the dangerous journey across the continent from 180 days down to an incredible 10.
Does anybody know when the Pony Express existed? Any idea? 1860s. How long did it last? 19 months. All of the American Western movies, etc., it was 19 months that technology lasted. And it was replaced by the telegraph. So 19 months, that's pretty fast, isn't it? And if I had a lot of time with you today, I can go through a whole shopping list of things that were disruptive. But we find that the ideas have been around for a long time. It's what is the right time that they come to fruition? When does that technology actually fit? How long did it take to get there in the first place? So I was listening to a lecture of a lady who's a very eminent academic, and she was talking about high velocity environments. And she included biomed. And yet you speak to any biomed company, and they've been 20 years in the making. It isn't an overnight experience. So strategy addresses a lot of these things to actually not dampen down, but to evolve a business to make sure that they can be at the right time in the right place. And that's the real key to it. So If you look at back in the financial crisis, there was a real interesting period of time for me, because before then, the concept of strategy was being really diluted because everybody was very successful. Then came along the crash and all sorts of companies had problems. So it's all about the survivors. Anybody know what that is? That's the first digital camera. Not pocket size, granted. But that was the first digital camera, and it was invented by Kodak. They owned the patents for it. Where's Kodak today? And why? Why did they lose this? They actually sold the patents off cheap. And it comes down to the momentum that exists inside an organization, that they become so convinced or so embedded, often by their finance directors, that they can't see outside of what's going on in their business, even though they themselves, their own people, have great ideas. And that's what strategy is. That is the first iPad. And it failed. Oops, sorry about that. The first iPad failed. It was back in the late 90s. It was a fantastic tool, but it weighed a ton. It had glass, physical glass, thick glass on it, but I could still email off it. It had character recognition that was probably better than some of the ones that we've got today, but it wasn't the right time. The thing is we all think Apple is just coming out with one great innovation after another. What they're doing is they experiment constantly, and what you see as consumers is a culmination of a long period of time that they've been strategically looking at their business. And they tweak and they change. And that's why often people would like to have a Mac. But what they've done is they've added so much value into it that people are still willing to pay 3 or 4 times for that item as compared to something else. And we see this in all sorts of things. Slack, big word of the moment. Those of you that don't know it, it's basically a platform that allows you to unify all the communications with a project or actions inside a business so that your emails, the documents, all of them go lined up. And you have basically a chronological order so nobody's working on the wrong document, etc. Fantastic. But guess what? Google came out with Google Wave a long time before. Not right, just not the right time. It was too hard to explain. We didn't have the difficulty quite then that we do today with too many emails and too many documents. Similar one was PayPal. PayPal was purchased by eBay, but they actually had their own system, which you've never heard about, and it failed. Now, that's interesting because in this case, they ended up having to purchase one because they couldn't invent it internally. They couldn't get their own system to work. That's strategy. Get it out there. So, what is it that we're trying to do here? We're trying to say that what this generation recognizes as the big companies today, your parents recognized another set of companies some years ago. And our kids will recognize another set. They don't remember MySpace, or they don't remember any of the other tools and things that we take for granted. And this is the interesting thing, is because the current approach to strategy is jump on the bandwagon. That's what I need as my company to survive. And therefore, maybe I need all this technology here. I need to have e-learning. What we need is the right tools for the right job. And that's what I'm basically talking about in terms of strategy. So, what do I think here? We're going through a generation of microwaving it as fast as possible. Learn how to do sales in half an hour. Can you learn sales in half an hour? I can let you read about sales in half an hour. But it may take 6 months before I can actually make you into a salesperson. What happens in all that other space of time? Interaction. Now, it's not to say that all the platforms aren't useful, but it's a combination of things. And as our last presenter showed, that even face-to-face still works today. So, these are some statistics. Strategies fail in companies. Companies are struggling now. And most companies, the bigger companies, they just keep growing by acquisition because they can't figure it out themselves. It's not a pejorative comment, it's just the facts. They haven't built their internal business to create the next piece of value. So, often we're being led, and sometimes possibly being led off a cliff, because we think one person knows the direction. So what we get is these big promises, lots of promises. We're going to put that new product out and the new service, and it's going to go like hell. And then next year, we promise the same thing. And this is what you end up with. Strategy isn't easy. It's not something you can put in a box and sign it off. My daughter, who, thank God she's paying taxes now, wanted to know what it was to be a consultant. Because there was one of the big accountancy houses that had a program, fast-track consultancy. I said, well, they can show you, they can train all sorts of things into you. But teaching you to become a consultant is going to be years. She doesn't like that. She wants it now. I think she'd like the salary now as well. So, is it all about creating that next great infographic? The one-page thing that tells everybody in the business? I think it's a little bit harder than that. But often it doesn't need to be that hard, because we just fail to see the information that's sitting in front of us. We're looking for a big breakthrough, and yet actually go into your own business and find out how many credit notes are issued, because that'll tell you how many pissed off customers you got. And that's where you're losing business. So for every new customer you're picking up, you're probably losing 5. Simply because nobody thinks that's an important. That's the finance department. And they're just a pain in the ass. Or you find out that actually somebody's down there knocking on the door and saying, well, we've got a great idea, just like the Kodak people. And they took their idea upstairs and they said, it'll never fly. It'll never fly. Because that's what we get in organizations. So we see a lot about behavior. So, the boiling frog analogy. No frog was hurt in the making of this. But the theory goes that if you drop a frog into boiling water, he will survive and jump out. But if you put him in water and slowly bring the temperature up, he won't. He will boil. And the idea is that companies are always looking for a solution, but while they're doing so, they're complacent. They're complacent in their own business. They're not actually looking at their own business. It's always going to be something else that's going to solve it. So if you have paid attention over about a year or so ago, Wells Fargo in America made a bit of a faux pas. They started setting up accounts for people without telling them. But it was a way to reach their targets. So this is a little excerpt about how the chief executive came about deciding the targets for the rest of the organization.
Other big banks average fewer than 3 accounts per customer, but you set the target at 8 accounts. Every customer of Wells should have 8 accounts with the bank. And that's not because you ran the numbers and found that the average customer needed 8 banking accounts. It is because, quote, 8 rhymes with great. This was your rationale right there in your 2010 annual report.
So if you wonder why Carillions had some problems, you might note it in the papers just today, or yesterday it was. Where did Carillions' value come from? they had marked up the company's value by almost 1.5 billion pounds as goodwill. Nothing there. The accountants just said, well, every company we bought, oh, there's a lot of goodwill there. Let's put it on the books. And guess what? If they put it on the books, the banks will loan us some more money, or the government will give us more jobs. Not much of a strategy, really. So, I like this. This was Steve Ballmer. Obviously, he's retired, but his attitude towards the iPhone. He couldn't envisage anybody walking around with $500 worth of equipment in their hand. And that's the kind of attitude that you get from organizations where strategy hasn't got the skills and the capabilities in the organization. So, it's broader than technology. Disruption creates uncertainty. That is what strategy addresses. So if your organization is having problems envisaging where they're going to go, they need to grasp disruption and not become afraid of it or say it's something they can't deal with. Guess what? The world's not growing as fast in terms of growth, financial growth, as it was. So if your business is saying they're going to grow by 20%, the normal organic growth isn't there. So some realism needs to come in. And that means they need to steal it from somebody. And they need to know who they're going to steal it from. Do you know what iPhones, or as they are now, PDAs and things, stole? Smartphones stole not from other smartphones. They stole from leisure money. People that had the money they would use for cinema. Later, it was kids with crisps and sweets. The actual decline in those values, because that's where the money goes to go buy apps and airtime. That's the real world. Debt. You can make people buy more, but you got to recognize that they got to be the right people because you want to get paid. A volatile political environment. Of course, that's my fave up there. I think that's just too good, isn't it? Oops, sorry there. Return. The kind of margins that you would have expected, thinking of the previous presentation on sales, the margins that were being expected by goods, supermarket goods, etc., has consistently dropped. So profitability, while at the same time, the city has been expecting more. A lot of pressures. Where is the innovation going to come from? And you've got to look beyond your own backyard, because it could be coming from Tel Aviv. It could be coming from South Africa. And you need to keep your fingers on the pulse for that. And then where's the shifts of power? So what you did in marketing last year, will it work in this year? Now, does that mean you can't have a strategy? You just have to go with the flow? Well, no, you have a strategy that takes these things into account. And the strategy may be that we will revamp our marketing every year. I remember doing some work years ago for a large electronics retailer. And they said, we can't have a strategy because we turn over our products twice a year. Full new portfolio products twice a year. And I said, but that's their strategy. So you need to plan on that. You need to be able to plan on bringing in and pumping the stuff out before you bring in the new stuff. That's strategy. That's just the environment you're in. So what is leadership? Leadership is a tool, what is strategy? Strategy is a leadership tool. And often they're taught in two separate environments. Leadership is all about group growth. We need to be able to coach, and we need to be able to talk about people's performance. And yet, you can't talk about any of those things unless you've talked about strategy, because you need to know where you're going with the business. So, real question is your organization equipped? Or are they standing out front while everybody else is falling down the drain behind you? By the way, no ducks were hurt in this exercise either. Somebody actually ran down with a net and caught them out of the drain going into the local stream. Couldn't find the video though. So, leading in uncertain times. Agility, interesting word, but it basically means being able to move quickly. So as opposed to saying a strategy is a long-term plan of 5 years, 10 years, it's how do I make my company agile enough to bounce around over those next 5 to 10 years? And I can plan that. How can I make my people trained in a way and with the capabilities to move between different functions, etc., to accommodate up and down cycles that we might have? Brexit, we have no idea, so I can't plan. Of course you can. I'm going to hedge about various different options. I'm going to make sure I can move quickly into those different options. And that's what it's all about. So, typically this is the innovation. And the innovator, in their ideal world, they're going to innovate, they're going to experiment, and then they're going to focus and hopefully get the performance. Does that mean that the incumbents are going to therefore lie down? They could. Or they can take a strategic look at it, which might be that they listen. They listen to the market all the time. They equip that. Most businesses are paying money to market research companies when they've got a larger population than the market research company actually speaks to. Family, friends, etc. It's an appalling thing that you don't involve the total environment of your business because somebody is listening. The second thing is you go out and validate it. Is it for real that there is an interest in this service, this product, this area? And if you adjust, you can adopt, and actually you may succeed in going forward beyond the innovator. I went to a legal presentation of about intellectual property. And the chap said, what's the difference between an inventor and an innovator? And there were a lot of different responses. And he said, he was a little short character, mustache and stuff. He says, I'll tell you what it is. He says, an inventor is kept in the garage by the rich. He says, the innovator is who makes money with the product. And it's true. So a lot of what happens down here is the ideal time for the incumbents to pick that business up and learn from it and run with it. And believe it or not, using our Apple example, that's what Steve Jobs did. He would look around, and that's why he didn't invent Apple didn't invent touch screens, but they bought them. And that's where we get into how you as a business can educate, can train, can develop management to become much more insightful. I love this line. It wasn't people selling candles that invented the light bulb. And that's where we are today. We're constantly looking and saying somebody else from the outside is inventing things. Why didn't we do it? Well, because you didn't set your company up to do it. You might be repeating your training and development to just gain exactly what you got last year and the year before that, as opposed to seeing, what do we need to do with our people that's going to be really different? How are we going to change the paradigm in our business?
For 5 years with this package, and I swore that I would deliver it to you because I work for FedEx.
That's very admirable. Thank you.
Hey, but by the way, what's in the package?
Nothing really. Just a satellite phone, GPS locator, fishing rod, water purifier, and some seeds. Just silly stuff. Thank you again. You keep up the good work.
So, this is what we need, is we need to have the skills. We need to have the skills to be able to know what it means. the insight, the information, etc. we get in our business. What does it mean? We need to create insight out of it. We need to make purpose out of it. We need to develop actions, but more importantly, we need to actually do something. They talked about there's 5 board of directors sitting on a log, and one of them says, we should jump in the water. What was the result? They're still sitting on the log because they couldn't agree. And that's what often holds companies back. Just as a little exercise, I wanted to find out what kind of innovations existed around the world. Not what's the next app, but what's the next innovations. And I found a list of over 100, and they are phenomenally detailed. I've got their name and address, literally, if I wanted to. All sorts of things, healthcare, etc. So the information is out there if your company wants to pursue it. But you need people in your business that have the capability to understand what they're looking for and then what to do with the information. And that's the real big challenge for companies. So, you may have heard of this expression, VUCA. Volatility, you deal with it by hedging. Uncertainty, you deal with it with intelligence. Complexity, you deal with it with simplification. And lastly, ambiguity, you deal with it with experimentation. There are always ways around disruption. And that's the whole idea. But the real key is people. People are part of strategy. Some of you may have seen this before. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm here to tell you that strategy, culture is part of strategy. If your business has the wrong culture, change it, because that's part of strategy. It may not be an immediate effect, it may take a long time. But if you were poor at implementing an IT system last year, guess what? You're going to be poor at implementing it this year. If you had trouble hiring people last year, you're still going to have trouble hiring people this year, unless you make it part of your business strategy. And that's the whole idea. So, key skills. Understand the construct of strategy. Often when I'm working with executives, I just do a simple exercise of finding out what they think strategy is. And there's an old expression that if you ask a Cuban for their opinion, you'll get 100. In other words, there's never a right or wrong answer. You're going to have within your own business many different definitions. But if everybody's working to a different definition, you're not going to succeed. You need to turn information into insight. There's no use having big stacks of printouts in your organization or analysis that isn't something you can convert into insight. You need to know the different sources that exist. That a single source is probably one of the most dangerous things that a company can do. Sorry, I will get there. You need to know how to create questions, and we call them smart questions or intelligent questions that the organization can ask to get better insight. You need to develop goals and strategic options that actually balance the opportunities that exist. You need to understand how to leverage the impact of the strategy on the organization. In other words, using it as a leadership tool, not something that PwC developed and you stuffed in the drawer, but it actually becomes a working document in the organization. You need to get your organization externalized. Everybody in your organization is a salesperson, regardless. So if somebody calls up one of your departments and gets the brush off, you've probably lost a sale, regardless what department it is. And lastly, you need to create a culture that's going to drive the business through your strategy. So, if strategy was easy, by very nature, it wouldn't create a competitive edge. If you copy your neighbor's strategy, you are commoditizing your business. all you're going to do is fight on price. Once you start fighting on price, it only goes in one direction. So, this is what we covered today. I hope it's been useful. Our stand's right here, just beside us. So if you want to have a chat with anybody about the development, obviously I'm a strong believer that face-to-face is an incredibly important part of strategy. I think people learn from different experiences, etc. I don't think it's something that you necessarily do on an online course and without the interaction with others. But realistically, strategy is about a wide-angle lens. You're going to have to widen your view as a business and for your own personal development. That's what you can bring to your company. Right, that's me. Thank you very much. Any questions? Or would you like to go find a coffee? Anyways, if you do have any questions, I'll be up here and happy to answer anything, or you can pop over to the stand. We'd be happy to see you. Thank you very much.